10 years ago, they said his father drowned in that lake. No investigation, no questions, just silence. But before he died, his father wrote one line over and over: "If I die, it wasn't an accident." Tonight the son came back, not for answers, just to sell everything and leave. But his German shepherd refused to enter the house. It stood there, staring at the lake like something was calling it. Then suddenly, it ran into the water and dragged something up from below. A rope, new, still wet. So ask yourself this: if no one has lived here for 10 years, who tied it, and why? Just days later, was the dog found drugged at the exact spot where his father died? Or worse, did someone make sure he never left that lake alive? Before we go deeper, I hope tonight finds you safe and not alone. Tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Leave it below. And if stories about truth, loyalty, and the things people try to bury still matter to you, subscribe and stay with us. A cold wind moved across Lake Ashford, flattening the water into dull gray steel. The wooden dock creaked softly against its posts. Clouds hung low, pressing the town into a silence that felt older than the season itself. Daniel Cross stepped out of his truck, wearing a forest green and black plaid flannel jacket over a dark shirt, black jeans worn thin at the knees, and brown low-ankle leather shoes scuffed from years of use. At 45, he carried himself like a man who had once stood straight under command, but had since learned to fold inward. His face was angular, weathered by sun and something heavier. Short, hazel-brown hair, threaded with gray at the temples, framed hazel eyes that rarely lingered on anything too long. War had not taken a limb from him, but it had rearranged the way he trusted silence. He did not like still water. He had not come back for memory. He had come back for relief. $60,000 from Silverline Developments would erase the debt notices stacked in his glove compartment and untie the knot tightening in his chest every month. The house was just lumber and nails. The lake was just water. That was what he had told himself during the 3-hour drive north. Rex jumped down from the passenger seat with controlled strength. The German shepherd's coat was black along the back with rich tan along his legs and face, his build athletic and balanced, ears upright and alert. He was not young anymore, but not old either. There was still speed in him, still discipline. His amber-brown eyes scanned the shoreline with the quiet intensity of a trained observer. Daniel had found him years ago at a veterans support ranch, a dog retired from service work, both of them carrying invisible fractures. Rex did not bark unnecessarily. He watched first. The house stood exactly as Daniel remembered it. Cedar siding faded to gray, a porch sagging slightly at one corner, and the dock stretching into the lake like a question that had never been answered. He walked toward the steps, boots steady on the gravel, but Rex did not follow. Daniel stopped. "Come on," he said quietly. Rex remained at the edge of the yard, body stiff, head angled toward the lake, not growling, not whining, just listening. Daniel felt irritation first, then unease. He had seen that posture before, in Afghanistan, when Rex had frozen before a distant sound no one else heard. Daniel turned slowly and followed the dog's gaze. The lake looked empty. No boats. No ripples except the wind's touch. Rex moved first. He trotted down to the dock, paws steady on the weathered planks, and stood at the very edge. Daniel followed. the wood groaning under his weight. "What is it?" he murmured. Without warning, Rex leapt into the water. Daniel cursed under his breath and stepped back as cold spray hit his jeans. The dog swam with strong, deliberate strokes, nose low, circling once near the dock's shadow. Then he dipped his head beneath the surface. A long second passed, then two. When Rex resurfaced, something trailed from his mouth. A rope. Thick. Clean. Fibers pale and unfrayed. He paddled back and placed it at Daniel's feet. Daniel bent down. The rope was wet, but not rotted. It had been cut recently. He ran his thumb along the strands. No algae growth. No lake-softened decay. This had not been here 10 years. 10 years ago, they had found his father floating near this very dock. Samuel Cross had been 58, broad-shouldered even in late middle age, a former commercial diver with hands like carved wood and a laugh that once filled the porch at sunset. In the months before his death, that laugh had grown rare. People said he had become restless, suspicious. He had started attending town meetings, questioning land reassessments, asking why property taxes near the lake rose after certain development surveys. Then he drowned. No full autopsy, no extended inquiry. The town doctor had signed off on accidental drowning. When Daniel had returned for the funeral, whispers followed him like drifting smoke. Samuel had not been himself. Samuel had grown unstable. Samuel had imagined enemies. Now Daniel held a rope that did not belong to the past. He stood slowly. Across the lake, a small marina stretched from the opposite shore. A figure moved near the fuel dock. A woman in her late 30s or early 40s, tall and lean, wearing a faded denim jacket and her dark hair pulled into a low ponytail. Even from a distance, she carried herself with practical confidence. Movements economical, no wasted gestures. Daniel recognized her after a moment. Sarah Whitmore. She had been 2 grades behind him in school, always sharp-eyed, always asking questions teachers did not like. Now she managed the marina since her father's stroke. People said she was fair, but guarded. She seemed to be watching the dock. Daniel looked down at the rope again. "Who's been here, Rex?" he whispered. A truck engine hummed somewhere behind the tree line. Daniel turned his head sharply. Through a narrow break in the trees along the access road, he saw the outline of a dark pickup. No company logo, no visible plates from this distance. The engine idled for a moment, then cut off. He stood there too long, rope in hand, trying to decide whether to wave, to approach, or to pretend he had not seen it. The truck did not move again. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He almost flinched. The caller ID read, "Silver Line Developments." Daniel answered after 3 rings. A smooth male voice greeted him. Calm, professional, the kind of voice that never raised itself because it never needed to. The man introduced himself as Mark Ellison, acquisitions coordinator. His tone carried warmth without intimacy. He confirmed Daniel's arrival and reminded him that the $60,000 offer stood, provided the paperwork was signed within 2 weeks. "We're eager to move forward," Mark said. "The community will benefit." Daniel looked out over the water. "Funny," he replied quietly. "The community doesn't seem eager to see me." A pause, barely perceptible. "Transitions can be emotional," Mark said smoothly, "especially with history involved." Daniel ended the call without committing. When he walked back toward the porch, Rex stayed close to his left leg now, no longer frozen, but alert. The front door groaned open with a familiar resistance. Inside, dust filtered the afternoon light into thin beams. The air smelled of old wood and something metallic beneath it. Daniel stepped across the threshold. For a moment, memory pressed against him so hard he had to steady himself against the wall. He had promised himself he would not dig. He would not stay. He would sign, collect, and leave. But outside, a truck without plates waited in the trees, and at his feet, coiled like a warning, lay a rope that had no right to be new. That night, as the wind scraped across the lake and the porch boards ticked with cooling air, Daniel stood at the window in his flannel jacket, watching the dark shoreline. 200 meters away, through the trees, he caught the faint glint of metal under moonlight. The pickup was still there. For the first time since returning, Daniel felt something shift inside him. Selling might clear his debt. Leaving might buy him peace. But someone was still coming back to this dock. And whoever it was, did not want the past disturbed. He closed the curtains slowly. Outside, the lake remained silent. Inside, the house no one wanted to remember had begun to breathe again. Daniel did not sleep much that night. The wind scraped along the siding like restless fingers, and each time the boards shifted, he woke with the same sharp breath he used to take in unfamiliar terrain. Just before dawn, when the lake was still dark and the air bit cold enough to sting the lungs, he pulled on his forest green and black plaid flannel jacket, stepped into his black jeans and brown leather shoes, and walked back toward the dock. Rex followed close, the black and tan shepherd moving with deliberate quiet, ears upright, scanning the tree line as if memorizing it. Daniel knelt at the edge of the planks and touched the water. It was colder than he expected. He had promised himself he would not dig. Yet here he was, rolling the rope into a coil and setting it aside, then stripping down to his undershirt and lowering himself into the lake with a controlled breath that felt like returning to an old, uninvited discipline. The dock's underside loomed above him in shadow. Daniel ran his hands along the beams until his fingers struck something that did not belong to the original structure. A patch of wood cut cleaner than the rest, sealed with screws that were newer than the surrounding rust. He surfaced for air, looked once at Rex, whose head tilted slightly as if urging him on, then dove again. The panel resisted at first, then shifted under pressure. A narrow compartment revealed itself between the supports, just large enough to hide something flat. Daniel pulled out a waterproof pouch, heavy with trapped air. When he climbed back onto the dock, his chest burned from the cold and from something else he could not yet name. Inside the pouch were 3 notebooks wrapped in plastic, their covers swollen but intact. The handwriting was unmistakable. Samuel Cross, broad strokes pressed deep into the paper as if carving words instead of writing them. Daniel flipped through the first book. Land parcel maps sketched by hand, names circled, dates underlined. Columns listing property taxes before and after something labeled Reassessment Review. The same pattern appeared repeatedly. Families declining to sell, taxes rising within a year, then quiet transfers through intermediary companies. The name Silverline did not sit in the buyer's column. It appeared in the margins, noted beside donations to a lake preservation fund, tied to grants and advisory meetings. Rex paced the dock as Daniel read, occasionally pausing to sniff the air, his muscles never fully relaxed. The dog's coat glistened under the growing light, water dripping from the dark saddle along his back. He seemed to sense the weight of what lay open in Daniel's hands. Halfway through the second notebook, Daniel found a page creased sharply down the middle. At the top, in larger script than the rest, his father had written, "Sequence." Beneath it, arrows connected events in careful order: tax adjustment, insurance audit, bank review, purchase offer. In the margin, written smaller, almost reluctantly, "Push until they bend." Daniel felt a tightness gather in his jaw. This was not paranoia. This was documentation. A truck engine interrupted his thoughts. Daniel looked up to see a county vehicle easing down the dirt access road. The door opened and a man stepped out, heavy-set, mid-50s, with thinning sandy hair combed flat and a face that flushed easily even in cool weather. He wore a pressed khaki jacket with the county seal stitched at the breast. His name badge read Harold Pritchard. The man's eyes were pale and small, the kind that darted away before contact became conversation. Daniel remembered him vaguely from town council meetings years ago. Pritchard had once been a schoolteacher before shifting into municipal administration, after a messy divorce that left him protective of order and deeply allergic to public confrontation. "Mr. Cross," Pritchard called, voice overly bright. "Didn't expect you this early." Daniel stood slowly, the notebook stacked under his arm. "Didn't expect visitors." Pritchard forced a polite smile that did not reach his eyes. "Routine review. Property status update. We're conducting reassessments along the shoreline. Standard procedure." "Standard?" Daniel asked, stepping off the dock. Pritchard adjusted his jacket. "Market values fluctuate. Improvements in projected development require recalibration." He handed Daniel an envelope, thick and official. "You have 30 days to address outstanding obligations before enforcement measures begin." Daniel did not open it yet. "Funny timing," he said. "I just got here." Pritchard's gaze slid briefly toward the lake, then back. "Paperwork doesn't concern itself with timing." He cleared his throat. "Your father struggled with these updates as well. It's unfortunate how stress affects certain individuals." The words hung between them like bait. Daniel's pulse slowed instead of quickened. "What do you mean by that?" Pritchard shifted his weight. "Nothing official, just town memory." He was troubled. You know how isolation can distort perspective. Rex stepped forward then, silent but direct, placing himself slightly between Daniel and the county man. His ears were high, his body angled, not aggressive but unmistakably protective. Pritchard's smile faltered. "I'll leave you to it," he said, backing toward his truck. 30 days. When the vehicle disappeared down the road, Daniel opened the envelope. The figure printed on the assessment was nearly double what he had expected. He ran the numbers in his head. Even if he sold equipment, even if he liquidated savings, he would not cover it in a month. He returned to the porch and spread the notebooks across the old table inside. Dust lifted with each movement. In the third book, near the final pages, he found a paragraph underlined twice. "Met with HP again. He says the board's hands are tied. Says funding depends on compliance. Says I should reconsider fighting." Daniel's breath stalled. H.P. Harold Pritchard. He leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. The pattern in the notebooks matched the envelope in his hand. Tax pressure, implied instability, offer from Silverline, the rope at the dock, the truck in the trees. Rex lay at the doorway, chin on paws, watching Daniel without blinking. The dog had aged into steadiness. His muzzle carried faint streaks of gray now, but his presence was solid, grounding. Daniel reached down and pressed his fingers into the thick fur behind the shepherd's ear. "You felt it first, didn't you?" he murmured. A knock startled him. He looked up to see Sarah Whitmore standing on the porch. In daylight, she appeared taller than he remembered, her frame lean and strong from years lifting fuel lines and tying off boats. Her dark hair, threaded lightly with premature silver at the temples, framed a face tanned by sun and sharpened by skepticism. Her eyes were deep brown, steady, not easily swayed. She wore work gloves tucked into her back pocket and smelled faintly of gasoline and lake water. "I saw Pritchard leave," she said without preamble. That didn't take long. Daniel studied her. "You keep track of who comes up this road?" "I keep track of anything that moves near the marina," she replied. 10 years ago I didn't. That was a mistake." Her jaw tightened briefly before she continued. "Your father came to me once, said he was mapping something. I told him to let it go." "Why?" "Because people who don't let it go around here don't stay long." She met his gaze fully now. "You planning to stay?" Daniel looked past her toward the lake. The water was calm again, as if it had never given up its secret. "I was planning to sell," he said. "And now?" He thought of the underlined paragraph, the initials, the envelope in his hand, the rope coiled on the dock. "Now I'm not sure." Sarah nodded once, as if that answer confirmed something she had suspected. "Be careful who you trust," she said quietly, "including me." Then she turned and walked back down the path, her stride purposeful, shoulders squared against whatever weather might follow. Inside, Daniel gathered the notebooks and placed them back into the waterproof pouch, this time not to hide them, but to protect them. The past had not been paranoia. It had been a record. 30 days. Someone had expected him to bend. Instead, he had found his father's handwriting pointing not toward fear, but toward sequence, and sequence could be followed. Daniel drove into town just after 9, the notebooks sealed in a waterproof pouch on the passenger seat, and Rex steady beside him. He had changed into his forest green and black plaid flannel jacket again, the morning air still sharp enough to warrant it. The town hall building stood squat and brick-faced at the center of Ashford, its white trim chipped, its flagpole leaning slightly as if tired of holding weight. Daniel parked across the street and studied the entrance. He had once run up those steps as a boy to watch his father argue about zoning maps. Now he climbed them alone, boots measured, shoulders squared in a way that suggested habit more than confidence. Inside, the clerk's office smelled of paper and stale coffee. A young woman sat behind the counter, no older than 25, with strawberry blonde hair braided tightly down her back and freckles scattered across pale skin that rarely saw sun. Her name tag read Lila Moreno. She looked up with polite curiosity that quickly shifted into guarded recognition when she saw his last name on the request form. Lila's eyes were green, earnest but cautious, the kind of person who wanted to help but understood the limits of her position. "Death records are archived downstairs," she said softly. "You'll need a written request for copies." Her voice carried no hostility, only the tension of someone aware that paperwork in Ashford had weight beyond ink. Daniel filled out the form in silence. Rex lay near the door, calm but watchful, ears flicking at every footstep in the hallway. The shepherd's presence drew glances from passers-by, some curious, others wary. He was not aggressive, but there was a steadiness in him that unsettled those who preferred quiet compliance. A man emerged from a side office before Lila could retrieve the file. He was tall, broad through the chest, despite a slight stoop at the shoulders, with iron gray hair brushed back and a neatly trimmed mustache that accentuated a jaw built for authority. He wore a navy blazer over a crisp shirt, no tie, and carried himself with the ease of someone long accustomed to deference. Daniel recognized him from newspaper photographs. Thomas Bellamy, former town supervisor, retired 2 years earlier after nearly 3 decades in office. People called him steady, practical, decisive. They did not call him warm. A factory accident in his early 40s had left him with a slight limp. Since then, he had cultivated a reputation for endurance, as if hardship proved moral clarity. "I heard you were back," Bellamy said, extending a hand that felt firm but not friendly. "Your father and I disagreed often, but he cared about this place." Daniel did not sit when Bellamy gestured toward a chair. "I'm requesting the full report from his death," he replied. Bellamy's expression barely shifted. The official report concluded accidental drowning. Samuel had been under stress. "So I've been told," Daniel answered evenly. Bellamy clasped his hands behind his back. "You have to understand the context. He was making accusations. Meetings became heated. The lakefront development plan was controversial. Investors don't like volatility." His eyes flicked briefly toward the pouch on Daniel's shoulder. "When a man starts seeing patterns everywhere, sometimes those patterns become the only thing he can see." Daniel felt the familiar tightening behind his ribs, the same sensation he had before an ambush when silence felt staged. "My father was a professional diver," he said. "He'd worked in colder water than this lake." Bellamy inclined his head. "Even professionals miscalculate." Lila returned with a thin folder. Daniel opened it on the counter. The pages were clinical, impersonal, cause of death, drowning. No extended autopsy requested. No signs of forced entry at the property. Toxicology minimal. He flipped to the incident notes. A single line caught his eye. Mild contusion at the base of the skull. No further comment. "Why wasn't that investigated?" Daniel asked. Bellamy's voice remained smooth. "Because there was no evidence of assault. He could have struck the dock." Daniel looked at the photograph clipped to the file. The dock angle did not align with the injury location. The contusion sat too cleanly at the back of the head. He said nothing yet. He turned another page. Witness statements described Samuel as agitated in the weeks before his death, concerned about financial pressure, claiming irregularities in tax reassessments. Several residents had characterized him as fixated. Daniel closed the file slowly. "Who requested no further autopsy?" Bellamy paused just long enough to signal calculation. "The county medical examiner determined it unnecessary. We rely on professional judgment." "Who was the examiner?" Bellamy hesitated again. "Dr. Everett Caldwell. He's retired now." Daniel memorized the name. Outside town hall, the sun had burned through the clouds, casting sharp light across the square. Daniel leaned against the truck and opened the notebooks again. In the margins of one page, his father had written, "Meeting with TB unproductive. Says my stress is showing." The initials were underlined once. Rex nudged Daniel's hand, drawing him back from the swirl of connections forming too quickly. The dog's coat caught the light, the black saddle gleaming, tan legs braced in quiet readiness. He sensed Daniel's pulse rising and responded the only way he knew how. Steady presence, silent grounding. Instead of driving home, Daniel turned toward the far end of town, where a modest brick building stood behind a line of aging maple trees. A small brass plate by the door read, "Dr. Everett Caldwell, M.D., The lawn was trimmed precisely, though the house itself showed the wear of decades. An elderly man answered after the second knock. He was thin, almost gaunt, with silver hair combed neatly to one side and skin so pale it seemed nearly translucent. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from age. His eyes, however, were sharp and observant behind thick lenses. "I was wondering when you'd come," Caldwell said quietly, stepping aside to let Daniel enter. The interior smelled faintly of antiseptic and old books. Certificates lined the walls. Caldwell moved carefully to an armchair, lowering himself with deliberate control. "Your father," he began, "was not delusional. Agitated, yes. Angry, but not delusional." Daniel leaned forward. "Then why did the report say otherwise?" Caldwell sighed. "Because agitation is easier to document than corruption. I noted the contusion. It was unusual. Not definitive, but unusual. I recommended further examination." His voice thinned. "The county board declined." "Who on the board?" Daniel pressed. Caldwell's gaze drifted briefly to the window. "At the time, Bellamy chaired it. Pritchard served on the Financial Review Committee. They cited budget constraints. Your father had become inconvenient." Daniel absorbed the words without flinching. "Was he drugged?" "No toxicology beyond standard screening," Caldwell replied. "Nothing flagged, but absence of evidence is not proof of absence." Silence settled between them. Rex lay at Daniel's feet, head up, ears attentive as if memorizing every inflection. "Why didn't you speak out?" Daniel asked finally. Caldwell's shoulders sagged slightly. "I did. Quietly. I was reminded that my contract was up for renewal. At 70, I did not have the appetite for public war. That is my failure." Daniel stood. He felt no anger toward the old man, only the weight of how systems bend those inside them. As he drove back toward the lake, he replayed the sequence in his mind. Tax pressure, character erosion, limited autopsy, dismissal. Not a single dramatic blow, just incremental isolation. His father had not drowned in one moment. He had been pushed, questioned, and reframed until his voice carried no authority. The truck without plates was gone when Daniel reached the house, but fresh tire tracks marked the dirt near the tree line. He stepped out slowly. Rex moved ahead of him, nose low, tracing the ground. The shepherd stopped near the dock and looked back, not at the water this time, but at Daniel. The pattern was clearer now. Samuel Cross had not died in a vacuum. He had been made unreliable first. And once a man is declared unreliable, the water can finish the story. Daniel stood at the edge of the dock where the contusion photograph replayed in his mind. The lake was calm again, deceptive in its stillness. He did not feel rage. He felt precision. If they had dismantled his father piece by piece, he would rebuild the sequence in reverse. The next morning broke warm and bright, a thin layer of mist lifting off Lake Ashford, as if the water were exhaling secrets back into the sky. The air had shifted. It no longer carried the sharp bite of cold, and Daniel changed into his forest green and black plaid shirt without the heavier jacket. The fabric hung loosely over his shoulders, sleeves rolled once at the forearms. Black jeans, brown leather shoes, the same steady uniform of a man who preferred consistency over comfort. Rex trotted beside him along the gravel path toward the old tool shed at the side of the house, tail low but relaxed, his black and tan coat catching the sunlight in clean contrast. He was aging into quiet vigilance, Not restless, not anxious, just aware. Daniel's phone buzzed before he reached the shed. The bank's number flashed across the screen. He answered with a flat tone, already braced. The voice on the other end belonged to Nathaniel Price, a regional loan officer who had once shaken Daniel's hand warmly at a small business seminar. Nathaniel was in his early 40s, tall and narrow-shouldered, with a trimmed beard that framed a mouth permanently tilted into a reassuring half-smile. His sandy hair was always precisely styled, and his tailored suits had the polished sheen of someone who believed stability could be projected through fabric. Yet there was a tremor beneath his practiced calm today. "Daniel," Nathaniel began, too carefully, "we've reviewed your request for loan extension." "And?" Daniel asked. "We're unable to renew at this time." The pause that followed carried more than policy. "Your property has been flagged under high-risk redevelopment consideration. The bank must protect its interests." Daniel leaned against the shed door. "High risk according to who?" Nathaniel exhaled quietly. "According to projected zoning adjustments and municipal assessments. These things ripple outward." Daniel understood the message. He thanked him without warmth and ended the call. Rex watched his face, reading it the way he once read distant sounds. The ripple continued. By noon, 2 regular clients from Daniel's small boat repair business called to postpone scheduled work indefinitely. Both sounded apologetic but distant, as if speaking from behind a thin wall of fear. Insurance followed in the afternoon, notifying him of a premium increase due to regional hazard updates. None of it was illegal. None of it was overt. The tool shed fire came that night. Daniel had fallen asleep on the couch with the notebooks open on the coffee table. Rex's low growl woke him before the smell did. He sat upright instantly, years of conditioned reflex snapping into place. Through the window, he saw a flicker of orange against the side of the shed. Not an explosion, not a blaze, just controlled flame licking at the corner. He moved fast, grabbing a hose from the side yard and wrenching it on. The water pressure sputtered before strengthening. He sprayed the siding until the flame retreated into steam and smoke. By the time it was out, the damage was minimal. Charred wood, blackened trim, nothing structural. Rex had not barked once. He stood at the edge of the yard, head lifted, nostrils flaring. When Daniel turned, the dog bolted toward the tree line. "Rex!" Daniel called. But the shepherd was already moving, swift and precise. Daniel followed, boots slipping in loose soil. Through the thin stand of pine trees, he caught sight of a figure, male, average height, wearing a dark hoodie and jeans. The man's build was compact, movements efficient, not panicked but purposeful. He glanced back only once. In the brief flash of moonlight, Daniel saw a narrow face with sharp cheekbones and a thin scar cutting from the corner of his left eye down toward his jaw. The scar gave him a permanently hardened expression, even in surprise. Then he vanished between the trees. Daniel stopped at the edge of the road, chest heaving, knowing the chase would only lead him farther from his ground. Rex returned moments later, ears still high, breathing steady but alert. The dog had not caught him, but he had memorized his scent. Police arrived within 30 minutes. The responding officer was Deputy Colin Hayes, a broad-shouldered man in his early 30s, with close-cropped dark hair and a faint stubble that shadowed a square jaw. Hayes had grown up in Ashford, son of a mechanic who died in a highway accident when Colin was 17. Since then, he had adopted a quiet, cautious demeanor, careful not to antagonize the institutions that provided stability. His eyes were observant, intelligent, but restrained by a learned hesitance. "Looks like kids," Hayes said after examining the charred wood. "Probably trespassing." "Kids with gasoline and precision timing?" Daniel asked calmly. Hayes avoided direct answer. "Camera catch anything?" Daniel walked him to the corner of the house where a security camera had once been installed by his father. The cable dangled cleanly, cut with a sharp instrument. The footage gap, once reviewed, revealed a missing 3-minute segment between normal recording and the moment Daniel burst outside. Hayes frowned slightly. "Signal interference, maybe." Daniel met his eyes. "You believe that?" Hayes hesitated. "I believe small towns complicate things." The deputy left with a promise to file a report that would likely rest in a drawer. The next afternoon, Daniel drove into town to pick up replacement wiring. At the hardware store, he encountered Raymond Cole, a local contractor in his mid-50s with a thick gray beard and a broad barrel chest built from decades of hauling lumber. Ray had a reputation for fairness and a temper that had once nearly cost him his business after he punched a councilman during a zoning dispute. Since then, he had tempered his anger into silence. His blue eyes studied Daniel carefully. "Heard about the shed," Ray said, lowering his voice. "You're not the first." "First what?" Daniel asked. "First to get reminded." Ray tapped the counter with 2 thick fingers. "Pressure works better than bullets." Daniel carried the words home like weight. That evening, Sarah Whitmore arrived unannounced, walking up the path with determined steps. Her tall, lean frame moved with quiet strength. The sun caught subtle copper tones in her dark hair. She leaned against the porch rail and looked at the blackened corner of the shed. "That wasn't random," she said flatly. "No," Daniel agreed. "They're escalating." Her eyes moved to Rex, who lay beside Daniel's boots. "And your dog's the only reason you saw it early." Daniel crouched, running a hand along the shepherd's neck. The dog's fur was warm under his palm, his presence steady. "They cut the camera," he said. Sarah nodded. "They don't want noise, just attrition." His phone vibrated again. A new email from Silverline Developments. Daniel opened it slowly. The revised offer read $75,000. No explanation. No negotiation. Just a short sentence at the bottom from Mark Ellison. "You cannot hold this alone." Daniel stared at the words for a long moment. They were not a threat. They were a statement of confidence. Rex stood suddenly, ears pivoting toward the trees. Daniel followed his gaze. Through the thinning light, he saw the faint reflection of a camera lens just beyond the yard. The man with the scar stood partially hidden, holding a telephoto camera aimed at the house. Daniel moved forward instinctively, but the man lowered the device and stepped back into shadow before disappearing again. The message was clear. Observation, documentation, patience. Daniel returned to the porch and sat heavily in the wooden chair. The pressure was tightening from every direction. Financial, structural, psychological. None of it loud enough to report. All of it precise. "They're not trying to scare you away," Sarah said quietly. "They're trying to exhaust you." Daniel watched the lake as twilight spread across its surface. He felt the weight pressing, subtle but relentless. He imagined his father standing on this same porch, watching similar shadows gather. Isolation does not happen in a single event. It accumulates. Rex lay beside him again, head resting on his paws, amber eyes fixed on the tree line. The dog did not whine or bark. He waited. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, breathing slow. If this was the strategy, then it was deliberate. No overt violence, just erosion. They wanted him to bend. Instead, he was beginning to understand the shape of the pressure, and once a shape is visible, it can be mapped. Daniel left the lake just after sunrise, the air warmer now, summer settling in with a softness that felt almost insulting. He wore his forest green and black plaid shirt, sleeves rolled neatly, black jeans dusted at the hems, brown leather shoes steady on the pedals of his truck. Rex occupied the passenger seat, upright and composed, his black and tan coat gleaming in morning light, ears erect and attentive to every passing sound. The drive to the neighboring county took 40 minutes along a winding road lined with tall birch and pine. Daniel kept his eyes forward, but his mind replayed the sentence from Silverline's email. "You cannot hold this alone." The message was not intimidation, it was architecture. The law office of Eleanor Grant occupied the second floor of a modest brick building above a bakery that smelled of warm bread and sugar. The scent lingered in the stairwell, strangely grounding. Daniel climbed slowly, conscious of the way his heartbeat steadied as he approached a room built for reason instead of pressure. Eleanor Grant met him at the doorway before her assistant could announce him. She was in her late 50s, tall and slender with sharp posture that seemed carved from discipline rather than vanity. Her hair was silver and worn in a precise bob that framed a face defined by fine lines earned through years of measured skepticism. Her skin was pale, not fragile but deliberate, and her gray eyes assessed people with quiet calibration rather than judgment. She wore a navy blazer over a cream blouse, minimal jewelry, no wasted ornamentation. There was no softness in her voice, but no cruelty either. Those who had dealt with her described her as unyielding in court and inconvenient in private conversations. "You're Samuel Cross's son," she said, extending a hand that was cool and steady. "I was expecting you eventually." Daniel stepped inside. Rex remained close to his leg, calm but observant, scanning the office with the quiet vigilance of a dog trained to register tension before it surfaced. Eleanor glanced at him once, then back at Daniel. "He's disciplined," she remarked. "Not many dogs wait without pacing." "He learned from necessity," Daniel replied. Eleanor gestured toward a long oak table layered with organized files. "Show me what you have." Daniel laid out the waterproof pouch, the notebooks, copies of the reassessment letter, the photographs of the rope and the damaged camera wiring. Eleanor moved through them without commentary, reading quickly but not superficially. Her fingers paused at the diagram labeled sequence. Her eyes narrowed slightly at the initials HP and TB. "This," she said at last, tapping the margin of the notebook, "is not proof of a crime. It is evidence of coordination." Daniel waited. "Silverline does not operate like a villain in a story," she continued. "They operate like infrastructure. They donate to preservation funds. They sit on advisory boards. They influence tax projections indirectly. Nothing here violates statute on its own, but collectively, it demonstrates pattern." Daniel leaned forward. "Pattern is enough." "For suspicion," Eleanor replied calmly, "not for conviction." She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a flash drive. "Your father came to me once," she said. 10 months before he died. He did not stay long. He said he was recording meetings, but he feared his own reputation was deteriorating. I told him to secure whatever he had off-site." Daniel felt something shift behind his ribs. He mentioned you in the margins. Eleanor gave a faint nod. He left something with me. I did not open it without his consent. After his death, I considered destroying it. Instead, I kept it. She inserted the flash drive into her computer. A dated audio file appeared on the screen. The timestamp corresponded to a closed planning committee meeting 3 weeks before Samuel drowned. Eleanor clicked play. The recording crackled briefly before voices emerged. One voice, calm and measured, Daniel recognized from phone calls. Mark Ellison. Another voice, deeper, more restrained, likely Bellamy. Then a third voice, lower and impatient. We apply the sequence, the third voice said. Reassessment, insurance flag, loan hesitation. They resist publicly for a while. Then they fold. A pause. And if they don't? Bellamy's voice asked. Push until they're exhausted, Mark replied smoothly. No confrontation, just attrition. Daniel's hands clenched at the edge of the table. The sentence aligned perfectly with the underlined phrase in the notebook. Eleanor stopped the recording. There is no explicit admission of murder, but this is strategic pressure. It establishes intent to coerce through financial manipulation. Daniel exhaled slowly. It's the same pattern. Yes, she said, and that matters. But you must understand something else. Her gaze sharpened. They will not escalate violently unless cornered. They will erode you legally, socially, psychologically. They will isolate you until your credibility collapses. That is how systems preserve themselves. Rex shifted slightly at Daniel's feet, sensing the tension in the room but remaining composed. Who was the third voice? Daniel asked. Eleanor leaned back in her chair. Likely Victor Hale. He serves as Silverline's external consultant. He's in his early 50s, lean, precise, with a narrow face and closely cropped dark hair beginning to gray at the edges. He favors tailored suits in muted tones and speaks in controlled bursts, rarely raising his voice. Former litigation strategist. He learned early in his career that public aggression invites scrutiny, so he prefers slow leverage. After losing a high-profile case years ago, he rebuilt his reputation through quiet advisory roles. He is patient. Daniel absorbed the name. There's more, Eleanor added. She opened another file and slid it toward him. 3 families in the past 8 years faced identical reassessment cycles. 2 sold, 1 relocated after declaring bankruptcy. No direct link to Silverline on paper. But Hale advised the zoning committee during each cycle. Daniel stared at the pattern expanding outward like ripples. So what do we do? He asked. Eleanor folded her hands. We do not accuse murder. Not yet. We build documentation. We file a request for a full audit of shoreline reassessments over the past decade. We request disclosure of advisory contracts. And we prepare for retaliation. Daniel stood, feeling both heavier and clearer. How long? Eleanor's expression did not soften. Longer than 30 days. As he left the office, Rex walked close, brushing briefly against Daniel's leg in silent reassurance. Outside, the sun was high, the town alive with ordinary noise, traffic, conversation, bakery doors swinging open and shut. None of it reflected the architecture beneath. Daniel paused beside the truck. He thought of his father standing alone in rooms like Eleanor's, holding evidence that did not scream but accumulated. He thought of the rope, the shed fire, the camera lens in the trees. This was not about proving a single act. It was about exposing a design. Back at the lake, Daniel placed the flash drive beside the notebooks on the kitchen table. He did not feel triumph. He felt alignment. The sentence from the recording echoed in his mind. Push until they're exhausted. They had assumed he would bend under invisible weight. Instead, the weight was revealing its own shape. And once shape becomes visible, silence becomes evidence. The evening fell heavy and breathless over Lake Ashford, the air thick with the quiet tension of summer storms that never quite arrived. Crickets pulsed in the tall grass, and the water reflected a bruised purple sky. Daniel sat on the porch in his forest green and black plaid shirt, sleeves rolled, black jeans dusted from the dock, brown leather shoes planted firmly against warped boards. The flash drive and notebooks lay on the table beside him, no longer hidden but not yet used. Rex lay at his feet, chin resting on his paws, amber eyes half closed yet alert, ears twitching at distant shifts in the tree line. The shepherd had grown more protective in recent days, shadowing Daniel from room to room without instruction. It happened just after midnight. Daniel woke not to a sound, but to the absence of one. The house felt wrong. Too still. He sat upright on the couch, breath slow, listening. The back door stood slightly ajar, moving faintly in the breeze. "Rex," he called quietly. No answer. The yard outside was dim under moonlight. Daniel stepped barefoot onto the grass, heart tightening in a way it had not even during the shed fire. He whistled once, sharp and controlled. No movement responded. He moved toward the dock, every nerve heightened. The lake lay flat, reflecting stars like cold glass. Then he saw it. A faint shape near the shoreline, half-shadowed. Rex. The shepherd lay on his side, tethered loosely to a post at the very edge of the dock. A rope, similar to the one pulled from the water days earlier, circled his collar. His breathing was shallow but steady. Daniel dropped to his knees beside him. The dog's eyes opened halfway, unfocused but alive. There were no visible wounds, no blood, only a faint chemical scent lingering in the air. Sedative. Daniel's chest constricted. He scanned the tree line instinctively, but saw nothing except darkness. He untied the rope carefully, hands trembling despite years of controlled response training. "I'm here," he murmured, voice lower than usual, stripped of command and reduced to plea. Rex's tail twitched faintly at the sound. It was not the restraint that struck Daniel hardest. It was the location, exactly where Samuel Cross had been found. They had chosen the place deliberately. Daniel carried Rex inside, laying him gently on the living room rug. The dog's muscles felt heavy, unresponsive, but not injured. His pulse was steady. Daniel retrieved water, checked his gums, monitored breathing. Every few seconds his eyes darted toward the window, expecting movement. He did not feel rage. He felt cold. They had crossed from pressure to message. At dawn, Daniel drove Rex to the only veterinary clinic within 20 miles. Dr. Marla Bennett met him at the door before the clinic officially opened. She was in her early 40s, compact and athletic, with dark curly hair tied into a loose bun and warm brown skin that contrasted with the sterile white interior of her office. Her movements were quick but precise, hands steady from years of handling anxious animals. She had moved to Ashford after leaving a larger practice in the city, seeking quieter work after a difficult divorce that had sharpened her independence. Locals trusted her because she treated animals like sentient beings rather than property. "What happened?" she asked calmly, as Daniel placed Rex on the examination table. "He was taken," Daniel said simply. Marla's expression tightened slightly. She checked Rex's pupils, listened to his heart, ran fingers along his limbs. "Mild sedative," she concluded. "Probably administered orally. Not enough to cause damage, enough to immobilize." She looked up at Daniel. "Who would do that?" Daniel met her gaze. "Someone who didn't want to hurt him. Just prove they could." Marla's jaw set. "That's worse." Rex stirred faintly as the antidote began to work through his system. His ears twitched first, then his head lifted slightly. His loyalty was not fragile, but the vulnerability of seeing him rendered helpless carved something new into Daniel's chest. Back at the house, Daniel found Sarah waiting near the gate, arms folded. Her tall frame cast a long shadow across the gravel. She wore work boots and a fitted dark shirt, her dark hair loose for once, falling around shoulders that carried quiet strength. Her eyes searched Daniel's face before shifting to Rex, now walking but slower than usual. "They went after him," she said softly. "Yes." Sarah inhaled sharply. "They're accelerating." Daniel nodded. "They want me to feel exposed." Sarah stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You are." The truth in her words did not sting. It clarified. Later that afternoon, Daniel walked alone to the dock. Rex followed but kept close, as if unwilling to let distance grow again. Daniel crouched and ran a hand over the post where the rope had been tied. The fibers left faint abrasions in the wood. He stared at the water beyond. For the first time since returning, doubt crept in. Selling would end this. $75,000 would silence the letters, the calls, the fires. He could leave Ashford with Rex and never look back. He stood slowly and walked back inside. On the bookshelf near the fireplace sat an old recording device his father had once used for town meetings. Daniel had not paid it much attention before. Now, something tugged at him. He lifted it down, noticing a small compartment beneath the battery casing. Inside lay a micro SD card. His pulse quickened. He inserted it into his laptop. Several audio files appeared, dated across the months before Samuel's death. One file was labeled Final. Daniel clicked play. The recording captured an outdoor conversation, wind moving faintly in the background. Voices emerged. Bellamy's measured tone. A third voice Daniel now recognized as Victor Hale. "He's exhausting himself," Hale said calmly. "The bank won't renew. Insurance flagged him. He'll fold." "And if he doesn't?" Bellamy asked. "We wait," Hale replied. "He's alone. Eventually, fatigue does what confrontation cannot." Daniel closed his eyes briefly as the words settled. The pattern was no longer theoretical. It was deliberate. Rex rested his head against Daniel's knee, sensing the shift in breathing. The dog's amber eyes were clearer now, strength returning. Daniel exhaled slowly. They had assumed he would bend under isolation. They had assumed loyalty could be frightened. But they had underestimated one variable. Rex had survived what they had planned. And Daniel now possessed something more dangerous than anger. He possessed confirmation. The lake outside remained silent. Inside, the strategy they relied upon had just spoken for itself. The state inquiry did not arrive with sirens. It arrived with envelopes, official seals, neutral language. Daniel stood in his forest green and black plaid shirt, sleeves rolled against the lingering summer heat, black jeans worn thin at the knees, brown leather shoes planted firmly on the porch as he read the notice twice to ensure it was real. The State Department of Regulatory Oversight had opened a preliminary review into shoreline reassessments across Ashford County. No arrests, no accusations, just a freeze on pending land transfers along Lake Ashford until documentation could be verified. The lake lay still behind him, deceptively calm, as if indifferent to the administrative tremor beginning to ripple outward. Rex sat at Daniel's side, posture erect, black and tan coat gleaming in sunlight. His amber eyes were alert again, strength fully returned since the sedation. He seemed more vigilant than before, pacing the perimeter at intervals, memorizing scent trails, then returning to sit close as if confirming Daniel had not vanished. The freeze bought time. It did not bring relief. Within 48 hours, Silverline responded. The lawsuit was filed in county court, alleging defamation and obstruction of lawful commerce. Daniel read the language in Eleanor Grant's office while she stood beside him, tall and composed as ever, silver hair framing a face that did not flinch at intimidation. "They're not suing to win," she said quietly. "They're suing to drain." The complaint named Daniel personally, accusing him of disseminating misleading recordings and interfering with development contracts. It demanded damages far beyond his savings. Daniel's pulse slowed rather than quickened. "So this is the counterattack?" "Yes," Eleanor replied. "And it's calculated. Litigation is expensive. They assume you will exhaust resources before discovery uncovers anything meaningful." Outside the courthouse, cameras from 2 regional news stations waited. Daniel had not expected that. A reporter approached him, a young man in his late 20s with neatly combed dark hair and sharp features softened by nervous enthusiasm. His name tag read Isaac Monroe. His suit was slightly too large at the shoulders, as if borrowed or recently purchased. Isaac spoke quickly, but listened intently, the kind of journalist still driven by curiosity rather than access. "Mr. Cross, do you believe your father's death was connected to this development dispute?" he asked. Daniel paused. He felt the weight of every word before speaking. "I believe pressure was applied. I believe records exist. I believe truth does not require volume." Isaac's eyes flickered with interest. "Will you fight the lawsuit?" Daniel glanced briefly toward Eleanor, who gave no signal. "I'm still here," he answered. Back in Ashford, the mood shifted subtly. People avoided eye contact more than before. Conversation stopped when Daniel entered the diner. Fear does not shout. It withdraws. Raymond Cole approached him one afternoon near the marina, broad shoulders hunched beneath a faded flannel vest, thick gray beard catching sunlight. "They froze my cousin's land deal too," Ray muttered. "He's furious. Blames you." Daniel absorbed that without reaction. "Does he?" Ray nodded grimly. "People don't like turbulence." Turbulence. The word lingered. Days later, as Daniel replaced a cracked plank on the dock, a car pulled slowly into the gravel drive. An elderly man stepped out, moving carefully but upright despite his years. He was tall but slightly stooped, with a narrow frame wrapped in a light gray cardigan despite the warmth. His hair was thin and white, combed straight back from a lined forehead. His skin was weathered, sun-darkened, his eyes a faded blue that carried both caution and resolve. He introduced himself as Walter Green. "I live 2 properties down," Walter said quietly. "I knew your father." Daniel set down his hammer. Walter held out a printed sheet of paper. I received this 5 years ago, he said. An email from a consultant suggesting I reconsider holding my shoreline parcel. It included projected tax increases and insurance concerns. Same language you've been describing. Daniel scanned the text. The phrasing mirrored the recordings almost exactly. Push until they bend. Reassessment cycle. Insurance review. Why bring it now? Daniel asked. Walter's gaze drifted toward the lake. Because I sold, he said simply. After my wife died, I didn't have the fight left. I thought it was coincidence. Watching what's happening to you, I realized it wasn't. His voice carried no bitterness, only regret. That evening, Daniel spread the email beside his father's notebook and the recorded transcripts. For the first time, independent threads aligned without assumption. Different years, different properties, same structure, same sequence. The state review expanded quietly. More parcels were examined. Transactions paused. Silverline's attorneys filed motions aggressively, seeking to dismiss the freeze as overreach. Court hearings were scheduled. Legal fees mounted. Daniel's bank account thinned rapidly. Eleanor negotiated delayed payments but warned him plainly. "This is the expensive part," she said. "They expect collapse." He considered selling again. $75,000 would clear immediate debt and fund relocation. He could leave before litigation swallowed him whole. That night, the lake was unusually still. Daniel walked alone to the dock wearing his plaid shirt, sleeves rolled, hands calloused and steady despite fatigue. Rex followed close, his gait protective, occasionally glancing back toward the house. Daniel sat at the end of the dock, feet dangling inches above black water. He held his father's notebook open to the page where the underlined sentence rested, faint but visible beneath repeated strokes. "If I die, don't leave." The words were not dramatic. They were practical. Rex settled beside him and rested his head gently on Daniel's hand. The contact was grounding, steady, not pleading, but present. Daniel exhaled slowly. He realized something then. His father had not been reckless. He had been patient. He had documented rather than shouted. He had anticipated erosion and attempted to map it. Daniel looked out across the water toward the darkened shoreline where unseen observers might still stand. He felt fear, yes. Fear for the house. Fear for his dog. Fear of financial ruin. But beneath it, a steadier current had begun to form. He was no longer reacting. He was continuing. The cost of staying was real. Legal fees, isolation, whispered resentment from neighbors whose land deals were frozen. But leaving would cost something quieter and more permanent. Silence. Rex shifted slightly, his amber eyes reflecting starlight. The shepherd had endured sedation, rope, intimidation, yet he remained beside Daniel without hesitation. Across the lake, a distant porch light flicked on, then off again. Ordinary life continued. Children would wake tomorrow unaware of zoning freezes or legal motions. The lake would remain indifferent. Daniel closed the notebook and rose slowly. They had expected exhaustion to bend him. Instead, exhaustion had clarified him. He walked back toward the house with Rex pacing at his side, no longer the man returning to sell and flee, but the son standing where his father once stood, aware of the architecture pressing in from all sides. The state investigation had only begun. The lawsuit threatened to strip him financially. The town still avoided his gaze, But for the first time since arriving, Daniel felt aligned with something larger than survival. He was not fighting for victory. He was fighting for continuity. And that distinction steadied his hands. 11 months did not arrive like a single season. They accumulated in hearings, filings, motions, and long drives between county lines. Summer thinned into autumn. Autumn hardened into winter. And winter finally loosened its grip beneath a pale spring sky. When the announcement came, it was not thunderous. It was read from a podium in a government building 2 counties away, under fluorescent lights and the measured cadence of official language. Daniel stood near the back of the room in his forest green and black plaid shirt, sleeves buttoned against the cool air, black jeans pressed clean, brown leather shoes polished out of habit rather than ceremony. Rex lay quietly at his feet, black and tan coat, thick and steady, amber eyes scanning the room with disciplined calm. The State Oversight Board confirmed what Eleanor had predicted months earlier. Thomas Bellamy was formally removed from his advisory position due to undisclosed conflicts of interest. Harold Pritchard resigned under review of procedural irregularities in tax reassessments. Silverline Developments was fined for non-disclosure of advisory contracts and ordered to suspend shoreline acquisition activities pending structural reform. The freeze became permanent for multiple contested parcels. No one said the word murder. No one reopened Samuel Cross's death certificate. Victor Hale did not attend the hearing. Mark Ellison issued a statement through legal counsel, his tone composed and corporate, emphasizing cooperation and compliance. There would be no criminal indictment for the drowning of a man who had already been archived by the system. Outside the building, reporters gathered again. Isaac Monroe stood among them, slightly more confident now, suit better fitted, voice steadier than the first time he had approached Daniel. "Do you consider this justice?" he asked. Daniel looked past the cameras. "I consider it exposure," he said. "Systems don't collapse in one day. They shift when light reaches them." Back in Ashford, the mood changed subtly. Not celebratory, not apologetic, just quieter. The diner no longer went silent when Daniel entered. Raymond Cole offered a brief nod instead of a wary glance. Walter Green walked his dog past the Cross property without turning away. Sarah Whitmore approached openly along the marina dock one afternoon, her tall, lean frame outlined against the shimmer of water, dark hair tied back loosely, face softened but not relaxed. "They'll rebuild differently," she said, leaning on a piling. "Companies like that don't disappear." Daniel nodded. Neither do lakes. The lawsuit against him dissolved quietly 2 weeks later. Silverline withdrew the claim without comment. Eleanor called with the news in her measured tone, satisfaction tempered by realism. "They're cutting losses," she said. "You were not supposed to withstand the cost." The cost had been real. Daniel had sold equipment, tightened every expense, accepted help he once would have refused. But the house still stood. The dock still extended into the lake, and the notebooks remained intact, no longer weapons but record. Spring deepened. Leaves returned to the trees. The air softened. One late afternoon, as sunlight stretched low and gold across the water, Daniel stood at the edge of the dock in his plaid shirt and black jeans, Rex seated beside him. The shepherd was older now in subtle ways, a faint silver threading through the tan of his muzzle, but his posture remained straight, protective, resolute. Daniel removed his shoes and stepped into the water. The cold rose around his ankles, then his knees. He did not hesitate. He waded farther until the lake reached his waist. Rex remained on the dock, not whining, not pacing, simply watching with unwavering focus. Daniel took a breath and submerged. The water was quieter than he remembered. Sound dulled. Movement slowed. He swam deliberately toward the area where Samuel had been found, guided not by markers, but by memory. Light filtered down in fractured beams. His hand brushed wood. A post, older than the others, sunk deeper into lake bed silt. He ran his fingers along its surface and felt the faint grooves carved into it years ago. 2 letters, worn but still present. S.C. Samuel Cross. Daniel held the post for a moment longer than necessary, not searching for proof, not searching for closure, but acknowledging presence. There were no revelations in that depth, no hidden bones, no dramatic unveiling, only a confirmation that the man who had once stood above this water had not imagined the pressure closing around him. Daniel surfaced slowly. Air filled his lungs with a sharp clarity that felt almost cleansing. He wiped water from his eyes and turned toward the dock. Rex stood at its edge, ears forward, body perfectly still. The shepherd's amber gaze locked onto Daniel's as it always had, through fire, through rope, through shadow. Daniel climbed out and sat beside him, water dripping from his shirt. The sun hung low now, staining the lake copper. For a long moment, neither moved. He did not feel triumph. He did not feel vengeance. He felt alignment. The truth had not produced arrests for Samuel's death. It had not rewritten the past. But it had stripped the system of invisibility. Bellamy no longer sat at meetings shaping quiet outcomes. Pritchard's resignation marked the end of procedural intimidation. Silverline's contracts were now subject to oversight. The architecture had shifted. Daniel leaned back on his hands and watched the horizon. Sarah approached along the dock, boots steady, her silhouette framed against reflected light. She stopped a few feet away, arms relaxed at her sides. "You staying?" she asked. Daniel did not answer immediately. He looked at the house, cedar siding warmed by evening sun. He looked at the tree line where a scarred man had once hidden with a camera. He looked at the lake that had held silence for a decade. "I'm staying," he said at last. Sarah nodded once. There was no ceremony in it, only acknowledgement. Rex shifted closer, pressing lightly against Daniel's leg. The night settled gradually. Not ominous, but natural. Porch lights blinked on across the shoreline. Conversations resumed in nearby homes. The lake absorbed the last color of day and returned to its steady, unremarkable surface. For the first time since returning, Daniel felt no invisible force pulling him toward departure. No bank calls, no legal summons, no truck idling in the trees. The pressure had receded, not because it had never existed, but because it had been named. He rose and walked toward the house with Rex pacing beside him. He was not a hero. He would not be remembered beyond this shore. But he had stayed where his father had been pushed to leave. And in staying, he had altered the sequence. The lake did not surrender secrets dramatically. It did not confess. It simply reflected what stood before it. This time, what stood before it did not bend. Daniel did not defeat a villain in a single moment. He did not bring handcuffs to the lake or headlines that shouted his name. What he did was quieter and perhaps harder. He stayed. He refused to let pressure rewrite truth. He chose patience over rage, documentation over noise, and loyalty over fear. In doing so, he reminded a small town that systems can be exposed, that silence can be broken, and that one steady heart can shift the weight of something much larger. Sometimes miracles are not sudden flashes of light. Sometimes they are the strength to remain standing when everything around you tries to wear you down. Maybe that strength is grace. Maybe it is God working through endurance, through community, through a loyal dog who never left his side. In our own lives, we may not face a lake or a lawsuit, but we all face pressure. Stay steady. Stay faithful. If this story touched you, share it. Leave a comment about where you are watching from, and subscribe to continue walking these journeys with us. May God bless you, protect your home, and give you courage to stand firm in your own quiet battles.